Welcome back, everybody, to today's Collector. This is a series leading up to the Mint Collective, where we sit down and discuss the approach to collecting with a few different collectors in our hobby. Today's guest is Bryan Denison. Bryan, welcome to today's Collector. How you doing?
Hey, doing great. Thanks for having me.
You bet, man. It's great to have you. The reason why I wanted to bring you on to today's Collector is because I'm familiar with your approach to the hobby. I'm familiar with the story behind how you built your collection. And I thought that that would be valuable for people to learn and to hear about, because you do have a bit of an edge when it comes to really forecasting and prospecting. So let's start it off right there, Bryan. When I speak about this edge that you have, why don't you break the news to everybody? Like, what does position you to maybe be able to spot talent more than the average collector could?
Sure. I guess first I should start by saying I'm basketball only. So, I try to project talent in the NBA. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there doing the exact same thing as me. I'm in a little bit of a unique position. Played my whole life, middle school, high school, on a really good high school team, played college basketball, coached some, current NBA pros, coached against a lot of NBA pros. So I've been around it, kind of communicating with these guys, just seeing what kind of separates the great ones from the pretty good ones. At the NBA level, everybody on the floor is pretty special, but it's the uncommon amongst the uncommon that you're looking for if you're prospecting for cards.
Yeah, for sure. So why don't you tell us the first sort of example in your collecting history when you were able to use your eye for talent to sort of hone in on a certain card or a player's cards, and what your strategy was in terms of that?
Well, it was the perfect storm. So the first and only prospect that got me back in the hobby after a 10-year hiatus was Giannis. I saw him in some grainy clips playing in the gym in Greece. He weighed about 150 pounds. He looked like he was about 6'8", which was all great. He was a young kid, probably 17, 18 years old. He's what kind of got me back in the hobby. He got drafted by the Bucks. I decided to jump back in and just see what kind of rookie cards were out there for Giannis. And I stumbled on a product called Prism, and I just started clicking buy it now, Jeremy. They were $10 at the time that I got in. I know some people have stories about finding Giannis Prism base in dollar boxes back in 2013, because nobody even could spell his name. And, back then, most foreign guys didn't pan out. But so Giannis is what brought me back. And to keep it simple, I just bought probably 150 base prisms. Nothing special. I didn't really know much about the products. I didn't know much about collecting. I didn't know what a pop report was. My plan was just buy a bunch of them because I think he's going to be really good. Sit on them. If he turns out to be pretty good, then I would look into grading them with BGS because, from my past life when I actually collected in 03, BGS was the go-to company. And so I was going to sit on them, wait for them to blossom, and then, grade them and then hopefully liquidate it. I got in purely for investment reasons. This was about 2014-ish, 2015, if I recall. So that's what brought me back. That was the first prospect that I really bought into was Giannis. And it was great. And I say it was the perfect storm because, we saw there's been a couple hobby booms. Well, this is before both of the hobby booms, So, buying Giannis prisms for $12 is like, people have dreams about that now. Just got lucky.
For sure. So there's two things I want to take from what you just said and expand upon. The first one is, you said, your plan was to buy a bunch of the Giannis cards, just hit the buy it now on everyone that you found on eBay. You bought about 150 of them or whatever that number ended up being. And so that was the plan, was to do that. But like you said, you didn't really know about the cards but you knew the player. And so what I want to kind of really dive into there is, like, it worked out for you now, and you also had that edge where you could identify the talent. So if you're speaking to new collectors, somebody who might be coming into the hobby and wants to build their collection, would you recommend that somebody go out and find a player that they really believe in and just stack that card in order to execute on a plan, which is, and we'll get to it for you, but that plan is ultimately to dispose of those at a profit?
Sure.
and then we'll get into what you do with those proceeds later. But would you recommend somebody try that now based on, that was already 9-10 years ago, 8 or 9 years ago? Would you still recommend that, or has your outlook changed at all?
My outlook is drastically different. So, after Giannis, I did the same thing with De'Aaron Fox and Jaylen Brown, and then Doncic, and then Donovan Mitchell. And look, I wasn't 100%. I had some misses in there. I had some Dennis Smith Jr. Right, so I had some Dennis Smith Jr. base prism. I was buying for $3 a pop. I was buying Fox for $3 a pop. I did it with Ben Simmons and actually did really well, even though he's blackballed right now. Nobody wants him in the hobby. So I kind of rinsed and repeated over and over. I didn't see anybody, and obviously Jokic and Porzingis and Towns and all those guys came out of those next few classes, but I skipped over a couple years from Giannis and waited, and then I did it with Fox and those other guys that I just named. The hobby's changed, Jeremy. Like, I was buying these cards for $2, $3 each. I was buying De'Aaron Fox Prism for $3 each. I was buying Jaylen Browns for $1.50, $2 each. That doesn't exist. You could pick the worst player drafted or the least sought after prospect in 2019, 2020. You're probably not getting his base prism for that. And that's after base prism has, I don't want to say nosedive, but significantly receded. So what worked for me, in 2014, 16, 17, 18, I'm not sure I know that's not a process that I would employ now. I would probably look to a little more higher quality type stuff if I was going to prospect. So my collecting, my investing has transitioned into a little higher dollar stuff, a little less risk stuff, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. But from a pure prospecting standpoint, like I prospected Kevin Porter Jr. And I still think, real highly of Kevin Porter Jr. I was buying a little more high end stuff. And so I didn't just stack hundreds of base. The pop reports are going up and up and up every year. People are kind of shifting their money from base to silver, and even shifting it from silver to RPAs and, some other higher end stuff and autos and golds and all that stuff. So that's kind of how I've done it with Kevin Porter Jr. Fewer cards, honestly, more money than I'm spending to invest, but fewer cards, higher end cards that sort of mean more.
Let's get into how you built the collection to where it is today, and we'll talk about what the collection is. But let's go back to the Giannis cards. So you stacked about 150 of them. You ended up having them graded by Beckett Grading Services. And then did you sell off all of these cards?
Yeah, so that was just the prism. So I probably bought 150 prism. And yes, I did grade those, but I also, like I said, I didn't know really what I was doing. And just because of timing, I got away with it. I bought hundreds of SP Authentic for $1 each. I bought hundreds of hoops for $1.50, $2 each. I bought hundreds of like a base Panini, which it's not even a product anymore. It's discontinued. So I probably end up buying probably 700, something like that. And I'm gonna guess 600, 700, literally. We're talking, nowadays you're talking, $2,000, something like that. It wasn't like this massive investment, but it did feel like it right there, because I was getting a lot of packages in the mail. My wife's like, what in the hell are all these bubble mailers coming in? I was like, oh, it's my new hobby. Don't worry about it. So I did what I did with the prisms and with all the other ones. I ended up grading them all, because as it turns out, he was an absolute animal, and 2-time MVP and Defensive Player of the Year. So I ended up grading them all with BGS. I sat on all the 9s I kind of sold right away. And I wanted to sit on the 9.5s a little bit longer. And I did really well back then. There was a pretty high gem rate from what I submitted. I don't recall exactly what it was, but it did really well. And then, ended up just kind of riding it out. And then I cashed out. I think when I cashed out, the 9.5 prism bases were right at 1,000.
Okay. So you ended up cashing out all these cards so that you could then put the money into something different. When you cashed out and you had all this money now from the sales, and I probably took a bit of time, but now you're sitting on a bit of a hobby bankroll, and you now were like, okay, I'm going to put this back into the hobby. How did you decide what to do, where to put it? Because this is what I really want to hone in on here, is that you didn't just come into the hobby with a big chunk of cash and throw it in and buy all these high value cards that you now own. You have an amazing collection. But you didn't just come in with money and buy those cards directly. You started buying $1 and $2 and $3 cards, even though they were, you can't do that anymore today, but you were able to do that back then. you bought the Giannis's, you had invested some more money to get them graded, then you sold them. Now you have all this cash. Once you got there, how did you decide what to do, what to buy, so that you could build your collection and start building the collection that you have today?
Yeah. I kind of equate it to, if we talk about the stock market, somebody buys a penny stock and they just happen to get it right and they make a fortune, that's money you didn't have. So now you're playing with house money. And so, my approach was, I'm going to go buy some IBM. I'm going to go buy some Microsoft. I'm going to buy some Apple. So here comes the Jordan collection. So I didn't just dive head first and start clicking buy it now on Jordans like I did when I first came in the hobby. I educated myself. I found the right podcasts. I found, House of Jordans. I started watching Cardboard Chronicles. I started, checking blowout forums. And I realized that there's almost a world within the hobby that is just Jordan. And so there's the hobby, then there's the modern and ultra modern, and then there's the 90s world. And then within the 90s world, there's the high-end 90s world. And then within that world, there's the Jordan world. So yeah. It's like a microcosm within the hobby itself. And so not hundreds of hours, literally thousands of hours of listening, reading, researching, asking questions. I've never been afraid to reach out to somebody who posts an insane collection. And you and I just are lucky enough to be friends with some of these guys. I ask horrible, dumb questions all the time, still to this day. And I consider myself a relatively accomplished Jordan collector, but when you see some of these other collections, it just puts it all in perspective. And so, these guys have been to a place that I've never been to. And so I'm asking questions all the time and I'm still learning every single day. And I've got a YouTube channel, Cajun Cardboard, where I talk in great detail about Jordan cards. Half of the reason I do that is to educate myself on those cards. There's some of them I own, some of them I don't own. I want to know as much as I can about the Jordan world, because that's kind of what gets me going now. So I transitioned all that prospecting money. I was like, let's do something a little less risky, a little more, dependable and stable.
Yeah, no, right on. That the thing that I want to talk about there is, you mentioned that you're not afraid to ask questions, you're not afraid to talk to people, and the community is such a big part. So it sounds to me like if it wasn't for the community, if it wasn't for social media, Instagram, consuming hobby content, as you mentioned, a couple of the legendary podcasts out there, if it wasn't for that, you probably wouldn't be where you are today with your collection. So you spoke to it in that already, but let's just hammer this one home for people who are watching who may not be yet integrated into the world of Instagram and YouTube. How important is it to have a community, to have people that you can reach out to? And especially for you live in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. You've mentioned to me there's really no hobby community there. So speak about a little bit, Bryan, about, the lack of community where you live and how you overcame that.
Yeah. And it's probably no different than, there's some monster collectors that live in the Philippines, monster collectors that live in Australia. They can also feel detached, although they have probably better hobby communities than Baton Rouge, Louisiana. They can feel detached. I mean, they're halfway around the world. And think how hard it is to transact business and ship and pay what you got to pay to do those things with ship my cards and all that. So, your podcast, the ones that I mentioned, there's, 5 or 6 others, and it takes a while from trial and error to figure out who knows what they're talking about and who doesn't. It's really easy for me to figure out who does and doesn't know what they're talking about now, let me tell you. But it's only from thousands of hours of just pouring myself into it. My kids hate me when they get in the car, when I take them to soccer practice, when I take them, to baseball practice. They don't get their songs on the radio. They don't get Pandora. They don't get the radio station. They get nothing. They get sometimes it's 2-year-old House of Jordan episodes, or I'm listening to my own YouTube episode that I did, a video that I just released, and so they they roll their eyes and they just grin and bear it, because they know I love it. But yeah, like, I'm so excited about the Mint Collective, and I know we'll talk about it later, but I have not yet had a chance to shake hands and rub shoulders with all these guys. And what I wish there was almost a checklist, because I don't know people's first names. I mean, I know your first name and I know your IG, but you're one of the select few. I mean, most of the people I know just by their Instagram or their, or their Facebook account or whatever. So I can't wait to get more into it. And hopefully Baton Rouge can kind of mature and grow a little bit. We've got a nice, a couple nice local card shops here, really nice guys that run them. I'd love to go in there for a trade night, or something like that. And I get jealous when I hear you guys talking about trade nights, and I get, the people that live in LA, they're next to Burbank Cards, I mean, that's just, places like that are legendary. I just can't wait to be part of that one day.
So I think some advice that we should be really hammering home for people who are newer to the hobby and maybe trying to build out their collection, especially if they live in an area that doesn't have a lot in terms of hobby community. If you don't have local card shops, if you don't have local trade nights, local card shows, a monthly or a semi-regular card show, the best thing you can really do is, number one, you can travel. You can travel to card shows, especially since they've been picking up again since the summertime. And then, of course, it comes down to social media and really getting out there that way. Like you said, you're looking forward to the Mint Collective. I'm looking forward to being able to shake your hand for the first time there as well. Let's talk a bit about, you mentioned earlier on that you got into the hobby purely for the investment potential of it. You do not come across to me as someone who is still only in it for the investing. You come across as a very passionate collector. Now, I think we as a hobby, we've noticed over the past couple of years that a lot of people came into the hobby purely with the dollar signs, the returns in their eyes. That's what they were coming in for. And that's okay. The hobby's big enough for everybody. But I think some people who maybe didn't realize the returns they were hoping for, maybe they're out of the hobby now. Maybe they just didn't approach it properly. Maybe they bought the wrong things. But a lot of those people who've come in the last couple of years, I believe, have been converted. And I know for a fact, just from talking to some of them, have been converted to true collectors the same way you have. If you could just talk a bit, Bryan, about how you yourself mentally converted from coming in as an investor to becoming a collector. What was it about the hobby? What was it about the cards themselves that converted you from investor to collector?
Yeah. Part of it was when you sell the investor cards and you make a lot of money, you don't feel the same pressure and need to kind of stay in that mindset. You're like, okay, I did well, I did something right, I guessed right. And then you start looking for other avenues. Now, look, some people say they're collectors. Some people say they're going to take their cards to the grave. I have no intention of taking my cards to the grave, but I will stop just short of that and say the thing that I hate the most about the hobby is selling. I can't let go of cards. I can't even let go of duplicates, Jeremy. Like if I have a PSA 10, I struggle to let go of PSA 9 Jordans that are pop 300. I don't like selling it. So that is the investor still on my shoulder, kind of talking to me. Just hang on to that. Hang on to that. It's going to be worth more. It's going to be worth more. So it's really tough for me to liquidate. But yeah, I just educating myself and meeting the people that are in the 90s kind of collector world. And then even within that world, the Jordan collectors, it just wears off on you. And you see how happy they are. They don't care about, turning the card over. If it goes up 20%, they could care less. We've had chats on group chats where guys could make, a lot of money if they chose to sell a certain card. They have no intention of selling that card. We're talking 6-figure, sometimes 7-figure cards. They haven't even considered it, life-changing wealth. When you see that and you see those guys and how happy they are with the card, it can't help but wear off on you. Just hanging around people like that and communicating with people like that, it's really easy to transition from investor to collector. What worries me, and you touched on it, is all the influx into the hobby in the last, let's say, 18 months to 2 years. Some of those people took a bath. Like some of those people didn't have the same success I had, and I was just dumb lucky enough to have done it in 2015. It's a lot harder to make money prospecting today than it was in 2015. You could randomly click buy now on almost anybody in 2015 and do okay. Now you got to understand the cards. You don't just have to identify the prospect. You have to identify the particular card. And there's a million bazillion parallels, and not all of them are going to mean something 5 years from now. Not all of them are going to mean something 2 years from now. So it takes a great deal more education now than it did back in 2015. There's still ways to make great money in the hobby for these investors. Like if a friend of mine came to me and said, hey, I want to get in the hobby, I wouldn't say, hey, you can't do it anymore. You can't make money prospecting. You certainly can make money prospecting if you identify the player, but also identify the card.
That's great advice, Bryan. Let's take it one step further. because if you are new, how do you identify the card? You learned the hard way, even though you got lucky. But a lot of people coming into the hobby, they are going to make some mistakes along the way, and that's really that's the education, right? That's paying your dues a lot of the time. Now, you don't want to pay your dues to the point where it's gonna, you're gonna get into debt because of it. You want to minimize your mistakes, and that's the beauty of this hobby, is that it's more than just the cards. It's the people, it's the community, and it's the willingness of a lot of hobby veterans to share their knowledge with other people. So you really are inspirational, because you actually lived it. You managed to you've made some wrong moves too. You've prospected some players that didn't work out. Now, as you mentioned, you can't come in like you did in 2013, 14, 15 and buy these cards at a great price anymore. So what in your kind of opinion is the best way to mitigate the bad moves and really fast track yourself to be able to identify, okay, we know we like the player. We know we like, Luka, for example. How do you recommend somebody go about finding out what cards are important, what cards the hobby favors versus which ones they don't?
It's just, I wish there was an answer that was, 10 words or less, but that's one of the huge barriers to entry of our hobby, and all of us as collectors, and we want all the collectors and investors that we can get, right? Obviously we don't want bad actors, but anybody with true intentions, even if it's just to straight up make money, sure, bring them on. I think it's great for our hobby, because like me, they can eventually transition into collectors and like contributing members of the hobby community and things like that. There's no answer. There's too many barriers to entry. There's too many platforms to understand where to buy cards. There's too many platforms to understand how to sell your cards when you do make a profit, or if you want to cut your losses. There's too many products to determine which one is the right one to buy. There's too many parallels within the products to determine which of the, even if you guess the product right, you may guess Prism right. Well, there's a big difference between Nebula 101s and Black 101s and golds and base, and then, is silver the right move? I don't know. There's thousands of silvers now. Is green, is red ice, is purple ice, is pink ice, is blue ice. I mean, choice, fast break, even if you pick the right product, there's a million other decisions you got to make. It's really difficult. And there's no easy answer. It's kind of like you want to be a bodybuilder in the next 3 weeks, but you've never lifted weights in your life. You can't do it. It takes hundreds and thousands of hours. I mean, it's going to take literally 1,000 hours of listening, reading, asking questions, listening to answers, absorbing information. And honestly, it's going to take some trial and error. It's going to take some mistakes.
My advice to people would be, and I hear what you're saying, one of the biggest barriers to entry is just understanding the multitude of products out there. But I do have a bit of a solution for that. And that is simply to do what Bryan did, even though you didn't say it just now, but it's go on Instagram. I recommend people have an Instagram account that is only for cards. So you might already have a personal Instagram account, set up a second Instagram account, and it's a card account only. All you show on it is cards, because there are so many people who have these so-called card accounts on Instagram that will only follow other card accounts, myself included. If I follow a card account, all of a sudden I see someone puts out the dinner they cooked last night, it's not what I want to see. I see that when I'm logged into my personal account. I pretty much don't follow anybody that has meals and pictures of family dominating their page. It's a card account. It's its own little community within Instagram. And the reason I say this is to set one of these up is because then you will build your following. You will follow other collectors, other card accounts, and now you can send questions to people. And many hobbyists are very gracious with their time and want to help you out. So if you are looking and you're not sure, do I buy the Prism Gold or the Prism Gold Airwave, whatever it might be called, you can ask somebody. You can see someone that has some Prism Golds on their page in their collection. You can say, hey, is this the way to go, or is there any merit? Does the hobby favor this other parallel, let's say? And people will answer you. They'll help you out. So, that's what I recommend is, well, Bryan is right. There are barriers to entry. I don't think you need thousands of hours of research. I think you need some research, but I think you can actually leverage the research that Bryan has done, the experience that I have, and many others, and send DMs out, direct messages to those people and say, hey, quick question. What do you think of this? I get these questions all the time, Bryan. People say, what do you think of this card? Who aren't real. And, you know, it's usually hockey. I'm known as a bit of a hockey expert. So I will write back. I'll say, listen, I'm glad you identified this card, but I wouldn't buy that one. I'd buy this one instead. And I'll outline those reasons. So I recommend people who are trying to build a collection, if you're newer in the hobby and you don't have a complete understanding of the multitude of products, ask questions, leverage other people's thousands of hours of research like Bryan's. He's a very nice guy, as you can tell. He will help you. He's been helped. He will pay it back and pay it forward, as will I and many others. So now, with that said, it always helps to know people. And one of the ways to know people is to go to events, hobby events, card shows. And now I don't even want to call the Mint Collective is not a card show. It's an event. It's a collective. It's kind of blazing this new path in terms of hobby events. And the reason why I say it's not just a card show, there will be a card show at the Mint Collective, but there are also the signature panel sessions. There's the carnival. There's a whole bunch of things going on that make it more than just a card show. So Bryan, I mean, it's funny. This will be your first major sports card event, and you're coming to grow your network, to meet more people, to solidify relationships, and that to me, and to sit in on some signature panels to grow your mind, expand your wealth of knowledge in the hobby beyond what you've done yourself. I recommend this to everybody who's newer. I'm not saying you have to come to the Mint Collective, although we'd love to see you there. Maybe, you know, you can't make it in January, whatever that is. Go to card shows, talk to vendors, talk to people. That's how you can really start to gain an edge, overcome some of these barriers to entry, and build your collection into what you'd like it to be. Bryan, it's been a pleasure having you on today's Collector. Any final pieces of wisdom you want to share with the audience before we end this?
No, just be patient. Something I always tell, I get new guys in Baton Rouge that come and they want to get into card collecting. And I just tell them, master one thing first. Like pick what you're the most interested in. If it's a player, understand his market top to bottom, right? Go master that particular player, stick to one sport and get it, and then grow it. Right. And then buy Pokemon, then buy your hockey. And then, you can lean on experts like you about hockey. You can lean on Pokemon people about Pokemon, or baseball about baseball. But master one thing, and then you can start to help other people that are new to the hobby, at least in your one area. So that's kind of what advice I give to these people here. I say, what is your favorite sport? And then they kind of take it from there, and you can tell what their favorite sport is. And I say, start there.
Yeah, well said. I'm glad I asked you for final advice. Be patient and collect what you like, everybody. Thanks, everybody, for joining today's Collector. We will see you all at the Mint Collective at the end of January, the 28th to 30th. Bryan, thanks again for joining us. Everyone, have a great week ahead.
Thank you.